Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Comox Valley Regional District of January 31st to order. And I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land, and we are grateful for their past and present stewardship. And today is a continuation of our strategic planning touch base. And our first item on the agenda is the strategic planning update. Thank you, and I will pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And James Warren, Deputy CAO, will present this report and the 5 recommendations and answer your questions with the support of staff.
Thanks, Russell, and good evening, Board, and thank you to the Board for coming together in this special meeting. We wanted to present the update from the January 10th strategic planning session to the Board in a timely fashion and try not to have it be lumped in with some of the other agendas that are coming up. There's a lot of budget discussions happening, so we wanted to have this meeting here today. A couple of things before I get into the presentation. I think Lisa's going to pull up the presentation for me. I've got several slides that will walk through the staff report itself. And I'm hoping to hold questions until the end so I can get through the 8 slides. And then your executive management team is here to answer any questions that do come up. We can support that discussion. EMT has had a chance to review the report, provide input to the report, as well Alison Habkirk, the facilitator from January 10th, and who will be helping us going forward. She's also had a chance to review and provide some feedback and input. So without further ado, apparently I have to stretch because the batteries are just not quite right. So there we go. So just in terms of the staff report itself, the way it's structured is there's a few pages in the covering report itself with the recommendations, and then several appendices to support that discussion. The first appendix is about what we heard at the session, and then there's several specific topic areas that we touch on, and a final slide around preparing for the April and June strategic planning sessions with the EASC, Electoral Areas Committee, and the Board in June. So Appendix A, the what we heard document, we tried to collect all of the information that we heard from the Board on that January 10th session and organize it in a way that was meaningful to you. We grouped a lot of that conversation together. And so those are the topics that we list on the slide here. We also tried to identify whose responsibility is a lot of that work, and tried to generally say that it's either a provincial federal responsibility primarily, it is local government primarily, or it's a collaborative approach with possibly senior government, possibly nonprofits and community partners. So where to now? We see kind of 2 key actions, I guess, coming out of that January 10th session. First is that preparation for April and June, and I'll get into that in a second. But then secondly, because of the comments provided, because there's 4 kind of main themes that we saw, you'll see in the staff report, there's appendices on each of those themes, and I'll touch on those as we go forward here too. So for April 3rd, that's the Electoral Areas Services Committee. It's a dedicated session. Alison Habkirk will be attending that, and we'll be able to reach out to the chair to engage prior to the session to get some feedback. We heard 4 kind of common themes that we wanted to bring forward to the EASC session. Around advocacy, it's really focusing at this stage on the road safety, road speeds, road maintenance, and so that advocacy with Ministry of Transportation is important. Agricultural planning, there's a few different projects within the agricultural planning sphere. So it's the food hub, it's the work with the agricultural coordinator, it's the agricultural plan development itself, and we'll provide some background material on that. There was comments around land use planning and growth management in the rural areas, and so some dialogue around your zoning bylaws, around the OCP for the rural areas, some of the tools that exist already in your toolbox for managing that growth. And then lastly, the importance of having some rural perspective on the regional growth strategy. So it's an opportunity for the EA directors to provide that perspective. June 15th and 16th, this is the deep dive into strategic planning that we've talked about, and as well as the other activities that we would propose in a 2-day session around your core services, around your drivers. We want to touch on housing. That was a main theme that we heard on January 10th, was the importance of housing. I'll get into some of that action on housing in a minute, but for June 15th and 16th, we want to provide background materials that will help you and Allison work through what would make sense for the Comox Valley in terms of a housing authority possibly, or the role of local government in providing for supports or bricks and mortar or services related to housing. The staff report talks about how big of an exercise a housing authority might be and how impactful that could be for the community. So wanting to be sure that we get it right. And there'll be a fair bit of work going into that research material for June. Secondly, June 15th and 16th, measuring the strategic drivers. What can we present? How can we measure that? How can we report on are the actions that we're taking moving the dial with respect to those drivers? Are the 4 that are on the table still current? And we heard that on January 10th that yes, they are. Is there more work to be done? Is equity or diversity a component to look at as well? So we'll have some material around the drivers and measuring those drivers. Active transportation. So now we get into the 4 topic areas that staff heard you talking about, and we were able to group into some action. I think almost across the table, all directors mentioned the importance of active transportation and connectivity and connecting our communities. And so the CVRD has an active transportation network plan. It's a couple of years old. It identifies many different projects to promote connectivity amongst communities, to promote active living and active transport. And so how can that plan be implemented? How can we work towards implementing those different projects? Currently, we work with the municipalities. So the CVRD and the municipalities work collaboratively to promote those projects, to fund those projects. The Lazo Trail, the Lazo, I don't have the name of the project itself, but there's a multi-use path being installed along Lazo Road between Area B and Town of Comox. So that's an example of a collaborative project implementing the work. So we would suggest that we continue to follow that suit. We also see there's an opportunity with the new regional parks and trails service that's just getting underway. The work of that committee to support that service will be to identify its strategic priorities. We see an opportunity here for this board to recommend to that committee to put active transportation as a priority in the work that it looks at. So as the regional parks and trails committee starts undertaking its work, if this board is instructing or asking that active transportation be a piece of that work, then perhaps as that committee moves forward, it would look at opportunities to either acquire rights of ways or install infrastructure. And so 2 fundamental ways that active transportation could be implemented going forward. Batteries dying. Next slide, please, Lisa. Give that one up. Yeah. Is this yoga? Yeah. So housing was the second main theme that we heard. There is already work being undertaken through the CVRD. We have a homelessness support service. We have a good partnership with the Homelessness Coalition, the Coalition to End Homelessness, sorry. The work under Function 450, which is our land acquisition, emergency shelter and supported housing land acquisition service. So there is work being done around housing already. That said, there's more work that could be done. A minister's meeting was identified as a possibility to pursue, and we see we see value in pursuing that for a couple of reasons. One, Premier Evie has made it pretty clear that affordable housing is one of his priorities for his government, and it would be advantageous to talk with the minister about what the Comox Valley is currently doing through our existing services, through the homelessness, the housing needs analysis that we have completed for all the communities, and then trying to understand from the minister and the ministry how to better prepare the regional district for the new legislative framework that's coming up. So there will be legislative change, we understand, possibly in the spring session, that will provide tools or direction for local government to continue its efforts around housing. So that ministers meeting would be highly advantageous. And then, as I mentioned before, the research on housing models and affordability would be a key component for your June strategic planning session. I should say the 5 recommendations that are on the staff report are all tied into the slides that I'm presenting here. So we can come back to those recommendations if we want to following this. Next slide, Lisa. So the third kind of main theme that we heard was around social development supports. And Appendix D does describe a lot of the work that's being undertaken currently, a lot of the supporting documents that we have in place, as well as a table that shows what the CVRD either is or isn't doing or can't do because we don't have services in place. We have a poverty reduction strategy that, again, it's a couple of years old, and there's some real game-changing actions noted in there that can be implemented to reduce poverty in the Comox Valley. We're working with the Community Health Network around potential for that organization to play a more coordinating role with some of those game changers. And so we're suggesting that work continue. The reference there to the Accessible BC Act, there is this is legislation that is now putting upon local governments and public sector organizations the requirement to have an accessibility committee, an accessibility plan, opportunity for the public to weigh into those documents. And in the coming weeks, you'll see a staff report to the board that will introduce how the CVRD would respond to that new legislation. We're proposing a collaborative approach with the municipalities and making use of the existing accessibility committees. There's one for the Comox Valley, and there's also one for Cumberland. So we'd want to make use of those bodies because they're already in the community. They are people with lived experience, and there's value in that. The third bullet there talks about a proposed regional grant service. So we did hear pretty extensively there's interest in possible funding to community organizations around some of the work they're doing, and that funding could be pooled in a regional way and provided then to these organizations. We're suggesting that if the board's interested, a letter could go from Chair Kettler to the mayors and councils and the Electoral Area Services Committee, asking if there's interest in a broad approach and a regional approach. That response then would be able to illustrate how much interest there is amongst the whole of the Comox Valley, and that would then provide some guidance on, is this a regional approach or is it sub-regional, and just what that extent might be. I think our covering letter would need to be pretty clear about some of the parameters that we would want to follow in such a service, and having good clarity on the nature of the grants and transparency on how they're awarded would be key. So if the board's interested, we would work with Chair Kettler to draft that letter to municipalities. And then lastly, social planning is noted here on the slide, and to do all this work does require resources, and we're suggesting that a social planning role would be really important to be able to help with poverty reduction strategy, the work with our community organizations. So if there's support on the recommendation here today, we will come back to further explain and describe what that role might be, some of the funding requirements for that kind of a role, how it would partner with community organizations, what that expectation might be from the public, and seek further direction from the board. Next slide, Lisa. So the climate crisis response is the fourth kind of main category, and on this action item, we are identifying some work that's already happening, but also some new work or some better direction. So you're probably familiar with our corporate energy plan, the CEAP, and its actions are being integrated to our budgets as they're coming forward. That's on the corporate side. We're also undertaking community emissions inventories on the community side. And with those inventories, there will be some projects and some work that will come out of that as ways to reduce emissions in the community. What's really important, though, and this is based on a lot of your comments as well at the session, was that we don't want to proceed with some of these actions without public support. There was comments made around concern on government being in people's private business and private affairs, and so we want to make sure that the actions around community emissions and climate crisis response is understood by the public and supported, so that when we move forward, there is that support there. Collectively, on the corporate and community side, identifying the mitigation and adaptation actions around climate crisis will build your climate action plan, and then that will be that document to be able to advance. Lastly, there's a number of actions happening within the various CVRD services on climate crisis response. We feel it would be important to report to you on a more regular basis on what those actions are, seeking policy direction when needed, ensuring that there's awareness both amongst the elected officials and with the public on where the CVRD is moving in regards to climate crisis response. So that regular reporting is described in the staff report as well. And last slide, please, Lisa. So advocacy is another topic that was raised pretty extensively, and we agree, and we would like to be presenting to you on a regular basis an advocacy plan. So what are the key topic areas? What are the ministers or senior government that we're pursuing? What are some of the actions that need to be followed through on, whether it be proposing legislative change or regulatory change, new funding sources, bringing awareness to the work that either we are doing or that maybe needs to be done. You'll see the first bullet is around long-term funding stability. I think that's been talked about several times. And I know between ABICC and UBCM that has been a topic in the past, and we would certainly continue to push for that important piece. We want to align our advocacy plan with senior government priorities. I think it's easier to get some attention when we are advancing the important work of the ministries as well. And then this slide just notes the three ministries there that would be probably our first foray into an advocacy plan to bring to the board. So with that, Madam Chair, I think we're all available for questions as the board sees fit.
Great, thanks, James. And yeah, so this is basically what we heard from our last session. So hopefully you all have had a chance to go through it and see if it is accurate as to what was said in the last session and what you feel might need to be added or what is lacking. Now, are there any comments to start off? Dr. Grant.
Thank you. So just two things. I'm looking at the housing piece, and I noticed we also have advocacy at the bottom. You know, to really tackle some of these like affordable housing and or like housing for homeless, you really need to get some grant money out of this from the provincial and federal governments, I think, to make it work, especially with the poverty reduction piece. You can't build them like we keep building these, and then even when we take them and put an affordable housing piece to a big condo project, it's still not affordable. And the people complain and go, that's still not affordable. And so I think that this really needs to go along with the advocacy piece that you're saying for long-term stable funding for these kinds of things. And if the province is serious about doing something, then they should actually get onto that, in my opinion, because without it, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a heart attack all the time. So I would say that the recommendations for the advocacy for long-term funding is probably a really key piece to making this work. And the other one was on the nonprofits. So funding for the nonprofits, would that be a new service that would start, or would that be?
Yeah, I just want to go to the right page, and I believe it's in the appendix relating to social development, and it's that idea of a new service. Right there. So yeah, number 9, provide funding for social development supports from a regional source. And yes, this would require a new service to requisition funds. And so this is the idea that the chair may send a letter to the member municipalities and mayors and councils and ask for and the EASC and ask for that feedback on level of interest.
Yeah, and I think it'd be good to get feedback on that now, because as James was saying, we would really want to put some parameters on that if we were to send out those letters to participating municipalities. So I guess, you know, whether it's on the table or not is a good question to start with, and then what some of those parameters might be. Director Cole Hamilton.
Thanks very much, Sharon. Thanks, James. I just had a couple of observations, I guess, about recommendation 1, the active transportation piece, and particularly sort of the part B, the idea that this be a primary topic for the regional parks and trail service. And I was looking back at the active transportation network plan, looking at the priority actions, the sort of routes that had been flagged, and they're not, I think, easily amenable to being part of the regional parks service. They're largely linear and they're largely directly adjacent to major thoroughfares, which is probably not surprising. So I guess I had a question as to whether that was necessarily the right way of trying to get at things, and also a question as to whether if it's the regional park service, that would mean all participants, including the municipalities, would be contributing to these active transportation routes in the electoral areas. And I think probably most of the municipalities are doing quite a lot of work in our own communities to build up those active transportation corridors. And I think it might be, I'm just wondering about how practical or equitable it is for municipalities also to be supporting this in addition to the work in their own areas, because I don't believe there's any yeah, anyway, so I just wanted to sort of raise those two questions about the active transportation piece, whether we think that the Park Service actually could deliver any of the pieces of land we need for the APTN and or ATNP, and just about the sort of the equity of who would be contributing if it was going through the regional parks plan. Thanks.
So I think the on the first part about projects that maybe might not be amenable to a regional parks service, the service I believe is parks and trails. And so in our experience in the rural areas where we do have trail networks, they're often on ministry right of ways. They're often a partnership with other, usually it's the ministry, because they have unopened right of ways, road right of ways, or alongside existing travel corridors. And there's licenses of occupation that have to be taken out for that. So there is a parallel there to sort of the parks and trails component. Again, this would have to be something that the Regional Parks and Trails Committee really embraces and endorses and wants to pursue. As far as the participation in the service, yeah, it is a service of all jurisdictions in the Comox Valley, and so that service would be funded by requisition by all the jurisdictions. And I think it would really depend on you know where the Regional Parks and Trails Committee wants to go with respect to investing in infrastructure and advancing, if it is active transportation, what sort of, how does that complement then municipal projects and municipal priorities? It could be very complementary to the work that's going on, or the work that has gone on already within municipalities. But I think that would be really dependent on first the Regional Parks and Trails Committee undertaking that work, and then understanding how that may complement municipalities.
Thanks, James. And I would just say, just as a final, just closing off this comment, that there are two recommendations. So there's A and B, and I'd be much more supportive of A, which is implementing the plan through the existing electoral areas, A, B, and C, Parks and Trails Service, and of course, municipal parks and trails, and the RGS, rather than necessarily going through the Regional Parks and Trails Service. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Director McCollum.
Yeah, thanks. Just an overall comment. I wonder if we could maybe go through the recommendations and have a discussion on those in order, just so we're not losing the thread of earlier comments. I don't know if that's where the discussion's going, but I did have a couple of questions about recommendation 1, but I think it's maybe helpful if we structure it that way, if there's unless other people want to make overall comments about the report. I was just gonna start there, if that's okay.
Sure, I'll just go to Director Hardy first, and then we can receipt and move on to recommendation.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, she says the volume is maxed, but I was saying that we could do as Director McCollum had suggested, going recommendation by recommendation, just after Director Hardy's comment. So go ahead, Director Hardy.
Thanks. If I remember correctly, last time we were chatting about this strategy and the important work that needs to happen moving forward. One of the things that I had noticed was maybe there was, but I hadn't seen any reports in regards to the CVRD working more closely with the BC government services here in town. I know there's a lot of work with regards to CVRD working with non-government organizations, but what I had asked for at the last meeting was, again, getting those 4 or 5 different BC government ministries that have offices here coming in to meet with the CVRD on a regular basis. So maybe it's in the report, or maybe I just didn't hear it in Jane's presentation in regards to that very important advocacy work. Moving forward, I think it's really important that we are having that engagement and dialogue with the local agencies. To me, I haven't seen anything that has shown that there's been a lot of dialogue between the CVRD and those local agencies. Maybe there has been, but like I said, I just haven't seen it in reports. Also, that suggestion with regards to meeting on a regular basis with our MLAs and our MPs. Again, if we're trying to get meetings with ministers, I think it's important that we're having those conversations with our MLAs and our MPs to ensure that we can get our foot in the door with those ministers. Thanks.
Thank you. And maybe those agencies within town that the director was talking about might fall under the advocacy plan.
I think it probably falls in a couple ways, advocacy certainly, and also there's unless Alana wants to jump up and join in or correct me, I think that a lot of the work the CVRD has been undertaking has been with nonprofits and community organizations, and so there's work that could be done, more work that could be done with the other government agencies that are providing services in the community. And I think that would fall under some of the work that we're proposing around implementing the poverty reduction strategy. I'm seeing a nod. Sorry, I think you make a good point, Director Hardy, and that liaison with the BC government agencies that are also providing services in town can be enhanced and improved upon. So I think there's work that can be done there, and it would fall within that social development sphere. A social planning role would also be able to assist with that outreach and engagement and understanding where best the CVRD can be positioned to enhance those supports.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, if I could, and again, just going back to having that dialogue and that engagement, my experience with the Comox First Nations, starting with those folks at the bottom of the bottom of the totem pole, is again, when you meet with these folks locally and they say, sorry, we can't help you, then it's like, great, can you provide us with something in writing saying, these are the things, these are the issues that are holding you from helping us help other people here. So when you do have those meetings with the minister, you can say, even your own staff is saying, we're struggling here. But if we go and we meet with the ministers without, in my opinion, going through that process of dealing with the local services here, then the minister is just going to say, well, I would advise you to go back and talk with local services here first, and then come back and see me in 6 months and see what's going on. So that's been my experience. So again, if we're talking about advocacy, I don't see the harm in meeting with the local services and trying to see how we can work with them to help the non-government organizations and other folks here in town out. Thanks.
Thank you. We're back to, Okay. Okay, that was Director Moran next.
Oh, so we're going in order, correct? So recommendation one?
We're
No?
still on open receipt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say in terms of recommendation one, that I agree with Director Cole Hamilton and with sorry, I've got so many screens open here, with the A and B or part of that. And I guess I'm wondering, because I looked at the Regional Park Service bylaw again. I guess I'm wondering if it's preemptive to give a recommendation to that committee when it's still forming. And we do obviously have within that bylaw those three kind of focus areas, and one of them is regional trails. But I'm wondering if the suggestion here with this recommendation is for the active transportation plan to live in that service, because I don't see that that's the right home for it. And I guess I wouldn't want either the Regional Park Service to have to take on, you know, that, which might put in jeopardy some of the other priorities of that service. And I do think that the active transportation plan kind of deserves its own cozy little home. So
I think you know, we're very, very cognizant that the Regional Parks and Trails Committee and the service is just brand new and just getting its feet under itself. So so we're mindful about this recommendation. And I think why it's here is because the board was fairly unanimous in the discussions about how important active transportation is. It may be a nuance or not, but you know, we're suggesting including active transportation as a primary topic under the service. And I don't think that would preclude other projects in the network plan from being contemplated outside of regional parks and trails. But again, that would have to be you know, considered by by not just the committee, but by the board itself and by the municipal councils, because yeah, clearly there's a lot of active transportation infrastructure that already exists within municipalities and rural areas. So I'm sure if that helps.
yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you. You know, also within the active transportation plan, it's also a more fulsome plan that's many things in addition to trails. So yeah, that's just where I'm having a bit of a quandary about that. Thank you.
So in that recommendation, it's sort of both supporting what we're already doing in electoral areas and with the municipal parks under the regional growth strategy. Is that sort of correct with the A there? So,
yep.
So what Director Moran was saying about the whole thing moving under the regional park service is not necessarily accurate.
I think we would, our intent would be that that both means of implementing the plan would continue on the existing way, and then also active transportation as a primary topic.
So there would be these parallel services really that are complementary to each other moving forward. Is that the hope?
Yes.
Okay. Alternate Director Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I'm sort of coming into this not being part of the strategic planning, but my council members have been kind enough to brief me, and I chatted with Doug as well, and Director Haley, and yeah, just a few comments maybe in general about it being fairly ambitious and aspirational. So I really like to see a lot of the stuff that's in here, and your comments about coordinating with municipalities on some of those major topics, and then just trying to wrap my head around, like, because I look at this and it's great, but I see that there may be a capacity side of things, and so just sort of looking, trying to wrap my head around when it comes back in June. Well, is the idea that in June it'll be kind of, here's what it's going to take to move forward on these items.
The focus for June is really around the housing research and the drivers, the metrics and the measurements, and whether there's expanded effort around the drivers. And then, if the board is identifying other topic areas, the recommendations around active transportation, housing, social development, and climate crisis, they're all ambitious, yes, but they're identified as steps to take to move forward. So as noted, social planning includes a resource to be able to undertake some of that work. The research that will go into the housing authorities and land banks and whatnot for housing for June, that will take some work. So yeah, there is some ambitious activities in there for sure. But I think we've identified what we can, and then there's some resources there that will support some of that work.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Director Grave.
Thanks. I don't think we should scare anybody off when it comes to active transportation, trails, and connectivity. I think that's something that has to pervade all our functions. Because the regional parks is so brand new, I think it's going to naturally grow into something through discussion and meetings. When you talk about trails in the rural areas, as you know, we're totally dependent on the Minister of Transportation for anything we do on the right of way. And they seem to be, even after all these years, they seem to be very slow to embrace it. It's going to take a concerted effort from not just the electoral areas, but also the municipalities. I would think that we are definitely more than towing our weight on that. We just spent over $1.6 million on one little farm that connects the One Spot Trail through to Sturgeon Road. And, so we can do what we can from for the residents of the rural areas to do our bit. But really, I mean, the trails go from one jurisdiction into the other, into another. So as long as it forms a backdrop, as long as all the parks departments and all the municipal and councils and the electoral areas are in constant communication, I think that's the way that's going to move ahead. But I mean, active transportation is something that I think it just checks off so many boxes. You got greenhouse gas emission reduction, you got active communities and health issues, you've got, just mental health as well, that you can get from walking in the natural world or bicycling or what have you. So I think it should form one of the pillars of our long range strategic plans, because it's going to take all of us to get there. I know we had at one point we were talking about working with Comox First Nation on the foreshore, but even if that's not supported, we should be working on the back road or whatever. Which we are. So there's as long as the communication is there between all the different departments at the municipal and the regional district level, I think we're going to get there. But the big if in all these things for us as electoral area reps is absolute necessity to deal with the ministries of the province for just about every little thing we get. So, we're not masters of our own house, so we have to find ways of charming the senior government to get where we want to go on just about any of these issues. Thanks.
Thanks. So we seem to be focusing pretty well on recommendation 1. Are there any other general comments about the report back before we move off receipt and onto the specific recommendations? Director Grant?
So I'm just wondering, on the social planning position, was that part of the 8 employees that was recommended a few weeks back?
No, this would be an addition based on what we heard during your planning strategy.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, we're going into our budget starting tomorrow, and it's quite sobering when you start seeing the numbers. And so we talked at the last meeting about prioritizing some of these things, and I'm with Bob here. I'm not sure what the outcome of all of this is going to be and whether it's affordable or not. So that's my concern.
Thank you. And the other two waiting, is it okay if we move on to the recommendation, or is it about a general? Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Director Kerr.
Yeah, thank you. So kind of when I looked at them all together, the 5 recommendations, to me, you know, I started to see some overlapping Venn diagrams in my mind. You know, number 5, obviously the advocacy piece applies to all 4 of them. So that's an obvious one, but I also see 1 and 4 being very much connected. You know, buildings and transportation are, you know, huge greenhouse gas emission sources. So when I think about active transportation, that would support number 4. So I just wanted to, you know, take a step back and say, can we think about those together in some way? Because I think they support each other. And likewise, number 2 and 3, you know, the poverty reduction strategy and the housing issue are linked. So is there a way to think about those together, either through the advocacy piece or just in our strategic planning? So those are more kind of rhetorical questions for us to think about, but we might see some synergies going forward.
Is it okay to answer a rhetorical question?
Go ahead.
I think Director Curry, you're picking up on the wicked problems, and the staff report does talk about these being wicked problems, and that wicked is not meant to be a bad word. It's more a case of these are situations with such complexity and such social impact, and no fixed solution. There's no point where a lot of these topics are fixed or resolved or finished. So you're right, there is a lot of overlap, and I think what we were trying to do with the recommendations is to take these very complex wicked problems and distill them into actions that the board can put its consideration behind and move forward on. These are all very challenging because of the nature of the problem, because of the importance of convening and dialogue and understanding perspective, and that takes time. And that sometimes doesn't really fit with how we're so used to doing business in terms of very transactional activities and getting motions to move forward. So we try to find that blend of specific actions for some very complex problems.
Just a quick follow-up. Yeah, I think you and I have probably read the same strategic planning textbook, because aligned with, you know, wicked problems are the wicked questions you can ask, right? So the wicked questions are 2 things that you don't really think go together, but how can you put them together? So how can we as a valley reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and also improve our active transportation infrastructure? So those 2 are seemingly separate, but they go together. So maybe as a solution to the wicked problems, as we start asking those questions and linking things, because if you work on 2 things together that are simultaneously working towards the same end, you can bring in more ministries, more partners to the table that are working and rowing in the same direction.
Thank you. And Director McCollum.
Oh, my light's on for recommendation 1, should we?
Okay, so we'll take care of receipts. All in favor of receipt? Any opposed? That's carried. And go ahead, Director.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to make some comments around how we addressed active transportation outside of the municipalities and how it relates to our park service. In my mind, when we had the discussions about the park service in the previous term, it was mainly centered around conservation, although I know that there was some discussion about linkages and linear parks. And I think that active transportation could definitely provide like some guidance as to, you know, when there's an opportunity and why we would want to put resources into a land acquisition. But I think there should be a distinct difference between trail development beside a roadway versus creating a linear park. To me, those are kind of different. For example, if this is a regional service and everyone is contributing towards it, and we're looking at a linear park that could connect like Cumberland and Courtney, that's a value to, you know, the whole region. Whereas if we're talking about using the regional park service to augment the roadside in the rural areas, I think that that should maybe remain with the local parks in those areas, or whatever methods there are for funding those, that I don't think that they should be brought under the regional service. To me, that is not quite in keeping with how where I thought the service was going. And to me, if we have, I'm not sure if it's the regional growth strategy service that will be, or that is currently overseeing the active transportation strategy, or where does that reside right now?
Alana, do you want to come to the table?
We need to work out a system of signals with each other. So through Madam Chair to the directors, that's exactly where we housed it. And the reason that we did that, it was because the emphasis was not on the corridors that we ended up with, but it was that idea of connecting the communities, connecting the core settlement areas. That was our starting place. And then in getting into the work with the public and with our agency stakeholders, it was that recognition that it's in the electoral areas that were most challenged. And so instead of saying, let's, you know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel in those areas. This isn't about recreation per se. This is really about getting commuters, getting people to work, to school, to their appointments. It became quite clear that what we were talking about were these on-road, linear, fastest, most direct routes to move people to support that modal shift. And so it made good sense to be in the regional growth strategy. I'm not sure, Director, if this is part of your question, but I would also suggest, like, we've talked to you about using the regional growth strategy as our, you know, policy data collection. We don't use it for capital. And so in working with park staff now, that's kind of the arrangement that we've come to. So for example, on the city's Lake Trail request, that's kind of where our mind is. Is this something that would fit in a electoral area community park service? Because the RGS to date has not entered that sphere.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, so, and that does kind of help me formulate what I would envision as that it would stay where it is. And, you know, perhaps there's opportunities to send potential projects to the regional park service if it meets that criteria of being more of a linear park that's serving a regional interest versus providing a means of funding roadside improvements in areas outside of the municipalities. To me, that those two things could be different. And so I like what's in the recommendation for the A, and B, I think we just need to be clear on some details. And I don't know that primary topic under including active transportation as a primary topic under regional parks and trails is completely in keeping with what I saw that service becoming, although I recognize that I'm one person and no strategic planning has been done in that service, but I would hesitate to highlight that as a primary topic for that particular strategy. So anyway, I'll let others go. Thanks.
Hey, Director Morin.
Yeah, I just going back to my earlier point, I'm on the same page. And I guess I have a question around, you know, we have a lot of active transportation, I guess, barriers already that have nothing to do with parks per se, such as the school kids walking on Lake Trail Road that is, you know, in an electoral area. And I know it's Modi that's responsible, but the city of Courtney is dealing with that issue. And so it concerns me that active transportation doesn't have its own kind of home and consideration, and lumping it in with the parks is also shifting that regional parks original kind of idea if it says primary topic. So I guess I'm wondering, you know, what is the solution for things like getting kids from A to B on those roads that are, in electoral areas, but maybe butt up against the municipalities. Because to me, those are high priorities that we don't seem to have a way to address other than going to Modi and begging.
I think a big part of it is the work through a document like the Active Transportation Network Plan, that partnership that is needed in a case like you described. Yeah, there's a partnership needed between the ministry, between the jurisdictions on either end or within the middle there. So those partnerships are really important. And then of course there's a funding component that needs to be identified of how to fund these projects. So there's not necessarily one place that it lives. It requires some collaboration there. And I think, like Alana said, the current way of the regional growth strategy being the place where the planning work is done, the policy work around implementing the network plan is the place for a lot of that dialogue right now, and it would evolve from that point.
And we certainly have all those other issues with people commuting from electoral areas into Comox or Courtney or whatever as well on bikes. And so to me, it just isn't really the best. The B part of the recommendation isn't the best fit for me. Thanks.
Yeah, I think most of the people here would remember that the active transportation thing really started out as the cycling coalition and having participation, trying to get the municipalities to talk about that at that committee. It was outside of any local government. And so, more recently, it's sort of come in to the regional district and kind of changed a little bit more to be broader than just cycling and be active transportation. But I think there's still an issue of really getting buy-in when you're only just talking about everybody's different plans and how they overlap, and getting staff in those meetings was always a challenge. Having engineers come talk about some of these plans was challenging because of the resources of municipalities maybe not being able to give up those staff for those meetings. And I think, as staff was saying, there's a part of it where we need the capital, right? So that would be where the regional parks plan comes in. I think what I'm hearing is maybe we don't want it as the primary topic of the regional parks and trail service, but it does need to be in there somewhere so that when we do have agreement on these things, overlapping trails, for example, that we have a place to refer it and send it so that everybody's at the table at that regional park service. We can have staff that are there to support that conversation and move those things forward. Because I think that has been the struggle with what was formerly the Cycling Coalition, which turned into the active transportation thing, that we just haven't been able to really get a lot of traction and the buy-in from municipalities and the staff support that we've needed. So I'm hoping that that this will help with that, having it in there somewhere in the regional parks where it can be referred to. Director Grieve.
Well, for wordsmithing, how about include active transportation as one of the considerations, one of the considerations of regional parks and trails service, or something like that. It should be in there. It should be a consideration whenever we're planning or talking about it. There should be that focus that eventually, anything we build will include an active transportation component. So I don't know how you want to put that in there, because going into the future, it's going to be a no-brainer. It's going to be everywhere, hopefully, but we have to. It's too bad the Ministry of Transportation doesn't consider themselves, a little bit more in a broader context than the Ministry of Cars and Trucks.
Thank you. Director McCollum, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify, if there is an opportunity that we're able to initiate with Modi, you know, as an example, you know, that little piece of road between where the One Spot Trail starts and, you know, the city of Courtney begins. And, you know, that's always been a challenge. And say we come up with a solution there and some funding is needed. Is there anything that would prevent the local areas park service from funding that rather than the regional one? Just, you know, to pull an example of what we're talking about. Are we just talking about funding these opportunities regionally rather than locally, or is there some other constraint that we're also looking at that can be addressed by the Park Service?
Madam Chair, I'll just ask Doug DeMarso, General Manager, Community Services, to respond, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think this conversation around the regional transportation aspects looks at, you know, the municipal plans, our plan, the overlapping plans with RGS. And it's a little bit preemptive to be discussing this much detail before we've gone to that strategy to understand what that really means. I think the regional parks strategy looked at the principles of the greenway connectivity and that nature-based kind of approach. And where the overlaps can happen should be sought out. But, you know, looking at it from an active transportation network plan is maybe looking at, you know, the critical spine trails that move the people through the area and how those can be funded and how these overlap. So if at that time those critical spine trails rise into the regional park service, then maybe that's when that debate should happen and be important. But I think it's just a challenge to, like, A was very clear that, you know, it's about being housed in electoral areas, about being housed in the municipalities, about being housed in the regional growth strategy. And B was really about taking all those plans and seeing if there's overlap into the regional parks and strategic service and plan development. And then taking that conversation and determining whether there's a need or desire from the community to fund those as they move forward. So we're getting a little bit ahead of that strategic planning process for regional parks and trails. And I think maybe the context of B was a little bit skewed the way it's written. And I just wanted to provide those comments on where the thoughts were from the past. And I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, that
but
was very helpful. Yes, I think maybe if we just took, yeah, just primary. Yeah, like, I guess the hesitation I have is just that, you know, the need with active transportation and just the estimated cost that we saw on that report is massive. And if we make active transportation a primary topic under this new park service, we're not going to be able to do the original primary topic, which was conservation. So that's kind of where my concern is. So maybe if we just take out primary and just say a consideration, then I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, are you making that motion? To amend?
It doesn't need to be there. There's nothing on the floor, so yes. Consideration.
Oh, because we were past receipt, but we didn't receive our first and second. No. Okay, yeah, great. Okay, so moved by McCullum, seconded by Wells. Any further comments? Yep, Director Moore.
Great, thanks. Yeah, just going back to the conservation piece. So it says in the bylaw, protection and preservation of regionally significant areas is the first one. So I guess I'm wondering if we include consideration, are those all weighted equally? So as an example, we have we talked about having passive parks where we had no public trotting on them. So say we have that situation and somebody thinks, oh, that's a perfect connectivity area. So what kind of, I hate using that word Trump anymore, but like what takes precedence over the other? Because that's also what I'm struggling with, because conservation came out really strong in those conversations. And there may be particular pieces that are not a recreational park. So that's part of my concern with even changing it to consideration.
Madam Chair, my advice is not to be too concerned that this would trump those other interests. Each one of the participants have representation on that committee, and you've tasked that committee to come forward with plans and ideas that ultimately you as a board will adopt or proceed with. So I think this gives them just advice that this is something you want them to consider. It's not putting it in front and center or otherwise. So let them do their good work and consider the recommendations with this if you adopt it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hardy, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm still trying to wrap my head around A from a electoral area B perspective with regards to the active transportation and what's being put forward there. I still am trying to grasp. Like there seems to be some concerns with regards to active transportation in regards to the regional park service, but with regards to the rural park service, I'm still I share the similar type concerns that Director McCallum has put forward with regards to that service going under regional parks and the costs associated with that. How are we dealing with that cost in regards to the rural parks? And I guess I just look at Seal Bay Park as an example of, although we call it a rural park, let's don't kid ourselves, everybody in Comox Valley goes to that park. So to turn around and say, well, you know, regional park services will only cover the cost for these parks, but not Seal Bay Park because it's a rural park, I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around. So yeah, I just thought I'd share my concerns in regards to even A in this recommendation right now. Like again, I'm trying to understand where I get and understand the importance of active transportation and where we want to go with that. But even Director Moran, with regards to her comments of, you know, maybe it does need its own service. And we start talking about active transportation instead of trying to push a square peg through a round hole. And that's kind of what I see here right now. And if it's not going to happen with regional parks, then I'm just wondering why we would still go down the same road with rural parks. Thanks.
Madam Chair, I heard questions about just what is happening through the community park service with respect to this. And I was just going to ask Doug DeMarzo to describe some of the activities that are happening and collaboration that is also happening through that service.
Yeah, I think over the years, our rural parks and greenways strategy has looked at those links in the rural communities that the rural residents felt beneficial, that weren't necessarily a polygon type park, but rather a linear connection, often on the side of road right of ways. We can look at Hornby Island with their trail there, the Denman Cross Island Trail. But I think most recently a good example of what we're all talking about here is the Lazo Road Network. And the idea of connecting butchers through to Point Homes and how that crosses different jurisdictions. And it had that priority of serving the regional residents in that area of a safe walking path to and from schools, as well as crossing through the town of Comox boundaries and then back onto Area B boundaries out to Point Homes. And that isn't necessarily a transportation network piece per se, but it was a priority for both the town of Comox and for the rural areas. And those two came together, and we've now received some federal funding to complete that plan. And I think that's an important piece where in some smaller areas, maybe it's out at Miracle Beach, and maybe it's not about connecting the spine trail from, you know, Saratoga Beach through to the one spot in the city of Courtney or whatever, which might be a larger regional type spine perspective. And maybe it's about getting those students to Miracle Beach School on a smaller roadside greenway. So it's looking at those roadside greenways where they make sense in the rural neighborhoods. And that's really what the EASC Parks and Trail Service is about. And likewise, municipalities have numerous connectors in their parks and master plans. And they also kind of say, here's a very good connector where we can connect to City of Cornwall, Cumberland, or out to an area A destination or whatever. And those are more of the larger ones where you start to work together and make sure those connections work. And then the electoral area ones are like the little fingers that maybe match into those spines, and the municipal ones are those little fingers that match into those spines. So that's the difference of perspective when you're looking at it from what we used to call the greenways perspective, but now the active transportation kind of perspective. Hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, any further questions? We do have the it's not an amendment, it's just the motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And so we're on to the next recommendation, which is regarding meetings with the BC Minister of Housing and research into housing authorities and land banks. Moved by Cole Hamilton, seconded by McCullum. Okay, open it up for discussion. Everyone is comfortable with the motion as it stands? Director McCollum.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy with the motion as it stands. I just wanted to dig in a little bit to the background that was provided around what we would want to engage with the Minister of Housing on. And one thing is that it may be worth asking if the province is willing to offer some type of support or funding for the establishment of a housing authority. I did hear David Eby speak here locally in the summertime, and it was one of the things that he raised as an opportunity for developing housing. So maybe there is a conversation to be had there. So I don't think that that would hurt to add to that list. I realize it's not included in the motion. And then there's also a mention of asking the minister about waiving fees, provincial fees. And I'm not sure if that was related to the discussion around DCCs, but I'm not clear what fees we would be seeking the province to give us authority to waive. So I just wanted to clarify what that was referring to.
I think you're referencing some of the bullets under that, the proposed ministers meeting. And so
I think it's on page appendix.
I think we were describing the gaps in the Comox Valley housing services and opportunities to make progress on improving access to housing, including the potential for waiving associated fees and charges for affordable housing projects. This relates back to the presentation of the board around the Wache proposed affordable housing project and their request around waiving DCCs. So it's not so much, I think, waiving provincial fees, it's our experience around some of these fees that are part of that construction process.
Okay, so I think maybe my question is, don't we already have that authority? Like, what would we be needing from the province in this case? Because there are fees in our bylaws, so I'm not sure what we would.
Yeah, maybe that's not clear enough there, but it wouldn't be so much asking some from the province, just explaining our current situation and what's happening here and what we are making progress on, where some work is that we have to do, and then asking the province around its legislative framework. And
okay,
yeah,
all right,
that was the intent.
More around the challenge of being asked to waive very considerable fees for development cost charges for nonprofits.
I see. Okay, I misunderstood that we were needing the province's support on that, but we're just identifying it as one of the many challenges. Is
something
that correct?
within our wheelhouse, but a challenge nonetheless.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
I guess there's very few revenue points for a local government. So having one of those taken away or being requested to be taken away to support nonprofit housing, then it could be also a funding request, right? Saying, okay, we're losing this one revenue source and then the possibility of something else. Director Grant.
Yeah, thanks. I can't remember whether I just dreamed this up or whether we talked about it last week, but I thought we had talked about having them fund the projects significantly enough that the fees would be included. So in other words, we don't lose the money by waiving it and they actually give us enough money to actually take that into account.
Yeah, so in their funding model, that's one of the things we'll ask is that included in what they fund? Is there an expectation that it is to be paid by the nonprofit? And did they know that nonprofits are requesting a relief of those funds? Director Kerr.
Thank you. I got really jealous reading about the Capital Region Housing Corporation and their 1,900 homes, you know, supplied to 3,500 people. Do we know, I guess, just specific question, do we know if we were to create a housing authority in the Comox Valley or housing service, would that open the spigot for more funding? Like, is that a directive of you know, Premier Eby and that funding channel, that if you have a housing authority, that it's easier to obtain grants and funding?
The limited research I've done is that a lot of these projects are about leveraging funding. So I think the short answer is yes, there's probably opportunity for more funding, but it would be leveraged. It would be based on local commitment, local inputs. Yeah, the sentence just before the 1,900 homes is that the CRHC has been in existence for 39 years. So they've got an extensive track record and a little bit of a different context. A bit of feedback we heard from some of the CAOs was really trying to understand what would be well suited to the Comox Valley. Some good models and good examples elsewhere, but Comox Valley is unique. So what would be a suitable model, and maybe how does that grow over time?
Yeah, and I think to your question, Director Kerr, that, you know, the Coalition to End Homelessness is a good example. Before we had that, the Comox Valley was receiving very little funding, and just that small amount that goes into the homelessness support service is leveraged. It goes very, very far, and there's been a lot of grants received since its inception. So I think it does certainly help in the leveraging aspect. Any further questions? Okay, we're on recommendation 2 on housing. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. And moving on to recommendation 3 on social developments. Can I get a mover? Grant and Wells. Okay. Open up discussion. Go ahead, Director Moore.
So I'm wondering, this recommendation, the bullet D says support a social planning position to help with this strategy, work with community organizations. So I guess I'm wondering, my understanding is this is one way, or, you know, one area of focus that we can do within social development with the support of a social planning position. Is this considered a precursor to broader use of that social planner down the road? Or I guess I'm just wondering, the poverty reduction strategy, I think, is a good place to start, but we obviously talked about a social planning function, looking at what that would look like and what that would encompass, which could be beyond poverty reduction. And I think it would require some discussion around the table of what the priorities are. So I guess I'm curious what that means in terms of that social planning position going forward. Is it just for this particular project? And, you know, I'm just wanting a bit more information about that.
So if the board supports this, we will come back to further explain and flesh out a little bit the role of that social planning position before proceeding with any kind of recruitment. And the intent initially is really around that poverty reduction strategy and working with, but it's not limited to that. It's not necessarily limited to just the poverty reduction strategy. We want to be clear with our community partners also around what to expect from such a role, and that we're not either overselling ourselves or raising expectations that we can't meet. So it'll be important how we do bring that back for the board. I think at this stage we're looking for that interest. Is there interest in being able to come back to explain this in more detail to you?
So,
Chair, if
sorry,
I
go
could
ahead.
just add to that too, what we will endeavor to do is come back to you and say, because I've said this before, we do a lot of social planning work. We don't have a social planner. Here's the things that we can do based on what we have. Here's what other communities are doing with those that have a social planner, because that's what I'm hearing from a number of you. You've referred to Katet and other communities that may have. So we'll do that list. And then we'll say, with this position, here's what we can accomplish. And you'll see the difference between what we're doing now, what others are doing, and what might be added having this position. So if you adopt this resolution, that's the information that will come back to you so that you can make an informed decision through the budget process.
Right, so so you'll present information to us, but we will still have the ability to frame what that will look like, so that all areas, because electoral areas may have a different idea of what that will look like than municipalities. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, because ultimately it's the board and the consensus of the board as to what the position will be, and you can determine whether that's value for money based on that. And the decision will be yours. And I think, as James said, it will be very important for the community that if this is created, they know exactly the terms of engagement and what that position may provide for them in terms of support.
Thank you.
And Director Grieve, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. As you know, been beating the drum for a social planner for a long time. This is I think we have to stop doing this off the sides of our desks. We have to stop taking money out of unrelated functions to fund it. What I see is the social planner, and we talked about this over 12 years ago, the fact that it takes the stress off a lot of the not-for-profits out there doing all this work, because what was lacking was the coordinating factor. Somebody who could seek and secure funding, someone could coordinate nonprofits, prioritize the work, and also, to a great degree, although we hold the purse strings, take it out of the political realm and make it so that it's needs-based, and have the groups work with the social planner, like I say, to prioritize what work should be done. And we all know that, like I said before, we're working on 6-7 cents on the total tax dollar. So we absolutely have to look to senior government again with our begging bowl for funding. But this would, because we're not the experts, we're here to represent our constituents. But when it comes to what would be most effective, somebody with that kind of expertise, I mean, not to say our staff haven't been doing a great job, but somebody that's specifically devoted to this issue to get the maximum bang for your buck every single time. As that Jewish philosopher once said, the poor would be with us always. So it is a drop in the bucket, but we have to have some kind of cohesive policy that works with all the caregiving groups out there, all the volunteers and not-for-profits, because otherwise what we'll see, and we've seen it before, is people hitting the wall and burning out. So I do think it's critical that we establish a function that's a standalone aimed at this. And being that we only get 7 cents on the tax dollar, it might just be 7% of what the money is going into it. But something stable, something that the coordinator can grow with experience, build the relationships, all that good stuff. I think it's absolutely critical that we give this life, give it a chance to develop and make it its own standalone service. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hardy.
Thanks. Again, in regards to this very important recommendation is again that advocacy work with the local, provincial social services that we have in the Comox Valley. There's I think there's 3 or 4 different services here in the valley. And again, going back to what it is that we're contemplating or considering is again, I'm trying to wrap my head again around these 4 local services and why they're not involved in taking that lead. Like, to me, it looks like the CVRD's having to take that lead because the local agencies aren't stepping up to the plate. So I'm just kind of wondering why that needs to be. And with regards to having a person that's in charge of social services for the CVRD, could we not, again, through advocacy, get these organizations coming in with the non-government organizations to try and figure out how we can get somebody to be the lead? And I get and understand the CVRD's role in regards to this, but to me, it looks like we're taking the leading role with regards to the sort of services here in town, and just trying to figure out why, if that's not happening because of local services, then I see that's why we need to step up to the plate. But again, we should be having these conversations with these groups to find out why they're not stepping up to the plate, and then get something in writing from them saying that they can turn around and do this. And then that kind of gives you that little push with the minister at the end of the day, with regards to what it is that we want to do. Like I said, again, going back to this advocacy with the local government agencies here in town, I'm really having a hard time trying to understand why the CVRD needs to take the lead instead of these local agencies. And how do we get these local agencies working more collaboratively to help us out? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that we're grateful for the agencies that we do have, but there's huge gaps and there's a lot of people falling through those gaps. And thankfully we have many nonprofits that are trying to catch those people, but they need help. And I think that's where we're at, is they've come to us for help, and certainly we can express their concerns to the province, but I think it's somewhat falling on deaf ears because they hear it from every community. And so we have to have a little bit of ownership over some of those gaps and supporting the nonprofits' good work that they're doing in our communities. Director Hardy, go ahead.
Thanks. And again, have we identified these gaps with the province? Have we identified these gaps with the local government agencies so we can turn around and like I said, if we're going to go and I'm all in favor of rolling up our sleeves and going down to Victoria and sitting down with the legislature for however long it takes to get somebody to listen to us. But again, I think we need to have something in writing stating that here's the gaps. And we've spoken with the local government agencies and they've come back and said, sorry, we can't help you.
Yeah, I think the poverty reduction strategy was attempting to do that, to identify some of those gaps and give us a sort of a direction to alleviate some of those. Yeah.
And I recall reading that paper, and I recognized that paper had identified a number of gaps, but that was the conversations with the CVRD talking with non-government agencies here in the Comox Valley, right? I didn't see anything in that report with regards to we met with this organization, like local government agencies, to hear what the concerns and issues were. Did we try and help facilitate those meetings with the local government agencies and the non-government agencies to see what those gaps were and you know, the non-government organizations, you know, if we're there with them, talking with the local government agencies, saying, hey, here's where the gaps are. If you can't help us out, then that's fine. Then that kind of, to me, reassures our constituents here in the Comox Valley that we've done everything that we could to try and get the government to help out. They're still not stepping up to the plate. And here's why we need to go the route that we're going. I guess that's the part that I'm looking at down the road here is we still need to be able to go back and communicate to everybody that here's where the gaps are. Here's what we tried to do to try and help. And here's why we need to go the route that we're going now.
Yeah, and I certainly think that could be part of our advocacy plan. Director Grant?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Richard. I was going to try and address this a little bit later when we got to advocacy, but you know, I think with senior government, there's nothing they love more than downloading stuff on us. I think at their Christmas parties, they actually have little things where they go, what can we dump on them this time? And so they do that with housing, and they're doing it with this as well. And I think we sell ourselves short when we go just as, say, the town of Comox or even the Comox Valley. I think that if you want to get change with the government, and they seem to be saying that they would, I think you have to involve the entire island, and you have to go as a big group and say, this needs to happen in every community, because it's every community in BC. It's not just us. And as we go one-offs to them, then it's easy for them to just blow us aside like they do. But if you come with a big group, and maybe it starts with resolutions at ABICC and UBCM, but I think at some point you have to get the large group to go down and say, enough, deal with these issues properly. Because you're just like, they're making a mess of every community in British Columbia with the way they're doing it. And they're not feeling the heat that we do, I don't think, because they just let it go. So I think that we need to get a bigger, more organized group if we're going to do this properly.
Thank you, Director Moore. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. It's always great when I agree with Director Grant, I think. I'm sure he feels that way. No, I mean, I agree that I think the advocacy piece to the higher governments is super important. And I guess just as someone who's slaved in social services for over 25 years, I've never seen the resources as devastating as they are now for people working in nonprofits, where they don't even have the staff to deliver the programs to the people most in need. So in terms of trying to have them do that advocacy, they don't, I mean, we talk about capacity here. They don't have the capacity to do that. And so I think that the advocacy piece is hugely important for us to take on. And I agree with Director Grant. I think it has to be kind of strength in numbers and a united group. In terms of the information, identifying gaps, well, the regional district and the municipalities have both stepped up in terms of doing the housing needs assessment, the substance use strategy, the poverty reduction strategy, and many other assessments that identify the gaps and barriers. And we've also done some good work, I think, in terms of involving people with lived experience to add to those numbers and those, you know, to add that narrative and that really important qualitative stuff. So I think we have the information, and I think we need to actually support our nonprofits by helping go to bat for them, because they're burned out. It's related to this topic. We've had 5 deaths in this valley this week due to the opioid crisis. 5 people in the valley, or in the last, I think, 10 days. So these are the things that our social service providers are dealing with daily. And, you know, they're the ones that are dealing with grief and trauma as well on the front lines. So I would just encourage us to really use our voices, and as Director Grant said, to be united and to to really come up with some ideas when we're at AVICC and all these conferences and we're having those really awesome appetizers that they provide, that we have some really good conversations with our colleagues about what can we do to actually take action with some of these things. So that's my hope in all of this. Thanks.
Thank you. So I just wanted to get a little bit more clarification on C. If I'm going to be sending a letter out, sort of what the temperature is at the board about it. I know that each municipality and the areas as well have their own granting services. And so just wondering what the letter might include, how everyone thinks it will be received at their councils. Director Grant?
Yeah, so I think it's something that we've talked about at our council a bit, but I think what our questions would be is who qualifies for the funding? Like how do you pick who's going to get it? How much can each participant get, or each nonprofit? We would probably look to get a hard cap on the amount so that it doesn't just continually spiral out of control. And the other one we would probably want to know is what the voting structure for this service would be. Because we don't want to be the little brother in this service again and then get told what we're going to do all the time. So those would be the questions our community, I think, would want to know.
Thanks for that feedback. Anyone else? I know that Cumberland Council, they'll likely struggle with this as we already struggle with providing a Cumberland-based granting service, and how difficult it is to make those decisions because there's never enough money to help all the wonderful projects and people that come to us. Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say that Courtney is actually, we outsourced it to the Community Foundation. There's a set amount per year, and the Community Foundation uses set criteria to determine that. So it does help to put an arm's length there, but I think it would be a much more complex thing to have a common pool of money. You have to figure out how people contribute, whether it's per capita and where projects are located that funding goes to, and all those different things, which could make it complicated to work out. But perhaps the Community Foundation could be an eventual sort of arm's length distributor of such a fund if it were to be created. But I see my mayor may have comments to build on there. Okay. All right, thanks.
And Director Grieve, go ahead.
Yeah, just simply that a lot of senior government funding is either channeled through regional districts or municipalities, and any social planning staff worth their salt would more than pay their own way.
Madam Chair, just add that what's been said here today could all be addressed through a service, and certainly the use of the Community Foundation was a means that the board used for some of its COVID funding that it received, right, setting criteria as to the types of use. And then we found that the Community Foundation, in fact, got more money was able to leverage that money for more purpose than would otherwise be funded by the regional district. So all of these concerns are possible within establishing a service. So we can take that feedback and help craft a letter that gets the more detailed input from the municipalities and rural areas.
Okay. I don't see any further lights, so I will call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. And we're on to recommendation 4. And that has to do with the climate and our greenhouse gas emissions. Moved by Kerr. Seconded by McCollum. Thank you. And I'll open up discussion. Everyone's feeling comfortable. support continued efforts to inventory community greenhouse gas emissions and communicate publicly about potential options to reduce community emissions with an aim to complement the corporate energy and emissions plan, working toward the climate action plan that addresses both mitigation and adaptation measures for the Comox Valley response to the climate crisis, and B, support regular reporting on climate crisis response actions to the CVRD board and seek direction on policy objectives and subsequent activities. Director Cole-Hamilton. Oh, sorry, Director Gray first.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure you've heard me say this before, that when it comes to climate change, it's not a matter of if, it's now. It's happening before our very eyes. And I do think, I'm glad they put some of the language in there around actual adaptation and climate proofing, talk about collection and retention of fresh water, all the things, and then dealing with the events as they happen. I think we're going to be, our emergency response is going to be more and more critical as we go forward. And I think I made the point that, you know, as much time as we put towards greenhouse gas emissions and dealing with that, we have to put as much time and money towards dealing with the effects, because as local government, it falls directly in our lap when there's fires and floods. It's right in our backyard. So, you know, I do think that in addition to trying to shut the barn door now the horses have left, that we have to actually, you know, spend some money on the mop and the bucket and the shovel and the wheelbarrow. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Cole-Hamilton, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm generally fairly happy with this recommendation. I had a question and a thought, and the question was, often one speaks now of mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency, like the sort of, I think adaptation is often thought of as sort of building, like works of construction, whereas resilience might be more sort of indirect things like food security. I'm assuming that when staff write mitigation adaptation, they're thinking of sort of the full range of responses that make a community more resilient to the impacts of climate change. Okay, that's great to see a nod there. And my other question was, or observation was, just about the way that we're communicating out. I know that's a big part of the recommendation A, and we have the 52 actions in 52 weeks to try and let the community know that we are responding. And I was just going to the dashboard page, and I'm wondering if there's any way we could, perhaps as part of the communicating out in 52 and 52, consider updating the dashboard. Currently, it shows that there are 6 items, and 2 of them are waiting for data. 3 of them have no metrics, and 1 of them has a big check mark, and it indicates that we're still emitting 65,000 tons at the landfill. I think if I remember the public, I was coming across this, I would probably not think that we were taking action, and I realize it's just a communication problem, and we obviously don't have. I'm just wondering if we could look at a way of presenting what we do have in a way that helps people understand that action is being taken. Yeah, anyway, just an observation for the communication part when we get to it.
Yeah, thanks. I think the dashboard, the RGS dashboard that you're referencing, it is an ongoing work in process that we are always updating, and as data sets come in and as we're ready to update and post, then we do that. So that'll be a regular activity. I don't think we're waiting on any particular time to update, but as material comes in, those measurements are updated.
Thank you. Okay. So the motion is on the screen. Any further discussion? Okay. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We're on to recommendation 5. Grant and Warren, thank you. And it's regarding advocacy. Have staff develop an advocacy strategy to lobby the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Environment and Climate Response and Transportation and Infrastructure on the topics of climate response and active transportation, with future advocacy on housing and social supports to be pursued once the CVRD board direction is set and centered on an aim to identify and secure long-term funding stability for such topics. Everybody likes that? No additions? Is there such a thing? Dr. Grieve.
Yeah, well, you know, this is, once again, this plays into the whole issue of us being mere creatures of the province. And under the Canadian Constitution, we don't even exist. That we always have to use words like encourage and should. And the province comes back with words like shall and will. You know, it's a little lopsided to say the least. So once again, you know, we go over their begging bowl and say, please, sir, can we have some more? And, you know, I don't think it's going to change. And it's built right in, hardwired into the country. But then again, you know, you got to be careful what you ask for, because we're not asking for half of this stuff. It's being shoveled down the line. The feds kick the can down the road to the province, and province turns around and passes it to little old municipal government. You guys deal with it. I remember Rich Coleman, when they opened the homeless center in Nanaimo years ago, I guess, when they had that BC housing thing that we lost out on because we didn't get in fast enough for a homeless shelter. But his big speech was, "I'm so glad we could help you with your problem." So that says it all.
Thanks for that. And next we have Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I understand the second part of this, the reason to be pursued, you know, in future. I think it would still be great to give a heads up during those meetings that, you know, we're coming for the next piece of this. And I don't know if it's something that could be included in this recommendation or maybe to look at, but I do like Director Grant's idea of maybe doing something intentional around having some conversations with other local governments around maybe a group delegation around primarily the social housing and social supports topic. So, you know, when I see future advocacy, it just concerns me a little bit, because I think that it is something, I know we want to have our ducks in a row to an extent, but I also think that having, you know, Courtney's certainly been having lots of meetings. I don't know about the other municipalities, but the more we can have all of our local governments and including Comox First Nation at some point, if and when they are interested to really show that we're all united, that this is a regional issue. It's not just a Courtney issue. Just because you see people who are unhoused downtown Courtney, we know that there are people across the region unhoused, dealing with poverty, dealing with substance use issues, dealing with being precariously housed or whatever. So my concern is just, what does that mean future advocacy? And I would like to see us make some kind of commitment around advocacy around housing and social support sooner rather than later. Thanks.
Well, I don't want us to forget recommendation 2, where we are going to the housing minister and talking about their strategy and trying to understand where they're going over the next few months as they continually announce new things for us. But I think, yeah, for sure, it would be great to reach out to other communities, but with that understanding of where the province is going, and then maybe we could figure out what's sort of missing from the local government perspective.
I could just to add one piece there, the idea behind this recommendation is that there be an advocacy strategy developed and brought to the board on a regular basis to talk about what the priorities are, where the points of emphasis would be. AVICC and UVCN, those are venues to take matters forward. So all of that would be part of that advocacy strategy. So and I think we're all taking some detailed notes on the conversation.
Director Grant.
Yeah, I think when we get into advocacy, and maybe this might have been better in number 2 as well, but you know, I think when I look at what goes on, the system is broken. Right, like especially when it comes to housing and with many of these issues, they need to come up with a better strategy that works for the province, and they need to come up with a better strategy that works for the local governments. Because right now they just drop it on you, and then they say, "Well, give us some land." Well, we don't have any land, so we can't do anything, right? And then we have the Aeronautics Act, where they put on, well, they don't. The federal government does, and then we can't build. And so, you know, there's all these constraints. They need to come up with a better plan that actually works, especially when it comes to poverty reduction and for homeless. You know, and I think that if we're going to advocate, that needs to be part of it. Is, you know, David Eby seems to be talking the right talk, although I've heard governments talk the right talk before. But this, I believe, needs an overhaul from the province to actually get it so that it's workable, and then bring it to us and tell us what our part should be or what it's going to be like. I have lots of ideas of how they could do this. I'm not the pilot of the plane. I'm not going to go in and tell the guy how to fly it. That's what they got to do. And then they've got to come back and tell us what our role should be in it. And I think that's what we should be advocating for.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I think it is really hard to receive that information in dribs and drabs without a real strategy. Director Hardy.
Thanks. I agree with regards to maybe tweaking that language revolving around future advocacy on housing and social supports. Like, to me, I would think that's the number 1 priority, and should be at the start of the paragraph instead of at the end or the middle. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, so would you like to change the motion? Go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just reading it the way I'm reading it. And if everybody else is comfortable with that language, then I'm fine with it. But like I said, we just had a pretty good discussion revolving around housing and social services, and to see that, you know, how I'm reading that is with future advocacy on housing and social development. It looks like the other part of the paragraph is more of a priority. And I get and understand your comment earlier with regards to, well, we've addressed it in recommendation number 2. So if we've addressed it in recommendation number 2, then do we really need to have it in this one?
Yeah, I think in terms of an advocacy strategy, we do want to, even though currently the housing thing is at the top of the list, we would still want a future strategy that would include it when it's not.
So I guess the question then, again, going back to the strategy with regard to your advocacy, what's a priority?
I think that we've identified in recommendation number 2 that housing is, and then we've also identified within our conversation today the social support and the climate.
Like I said, if priority is around housing and social supports, then I would like to see it at the start of the paragraph, then halfway down. But that's just me. Like I said, if everybody else is comfortable with it, then that's fine. That's just how I read it right now. Is it future advocacy? You know, define future advocacy.
Madam Chair, might I suggest the amendment would be to exclude with future advocacy on?
And just have it in the list.
Yeah.
So just remove with future advocacy on. And see how that looks.
I was going to suggest we just drop in the future.
Yeah, so we've done that. Is there a mover and a seconder for the changes made? Wells and Grant, thanks. And neither one of you have any more to add to that, okay? All right, so we're on the amendment. Any more input into the amendment? Are we good? Okay, I'll call the question on the amendment. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We're back to the motion as amended. Moved by Grant. Seconded by Grieve. Any more? Oh yeah, it was already moved and seconded. Yeah, sorry. Back to the motion as amended. Yeah. So any more discussion? All right, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Where does that bring us? To the end. All right. Director Grieve?
If you just cut me a little bit of leeway here. It's funny to hear us talk about housing, and yet here we are with long wait lists for our home inspections and adding more and more onerous requirements to just about every turn for builders. You know, it's we're sort of victims of our own success, I guess, in a way. But they've been rumoring for, is that a real word? For a long time that senior government is going to come in and basically streamline the whole process around zoning and everything. So, you know, we may have that taken away from us in favor of expediency and cutting corners. I know they've been threatening it for a long time. I think last AVICC, it was a discussion. It's probably going to come up again. But I think that in our own policies, in our own way, we can do simple things to make housing more affordable. It's never going to go back, folks. We've seen a doubling of housing prices in the last 4 years. So it's a very serious issue. But you think about what the government did back when I was a young person buying houses. I'm not going to bore you all. I'm not going to, but with the ancient history. But at least the Fed stepped up and they came up with that IHOP program where you could get into a house for a certain amount of money down and CMHC would finance the rest. But they don't seem to have the guts anymore to do stuff like that. So, you know, it falls on us, local government, to try to do what we can. So I do think that when we go away from this table, we should start thinking about simple, easy peasy, low hanging things we can do to make it more affordable for people to live. That's it.
Will you make a motion for termination? Moved by Grieve. Seconded by Grant. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.